Good afternoon and welcome to the programme. You're watching a special edition of The Essential with Harriet Jones and Olivia Marks.
Thanks for joining us. On today's programme, we'll be reflecting on some of the biggest stories on this year's student calendar.
From the junior doctors who went out in protest in Leeds City Centre against government changes to their contracts, to holding university lecturers accountable over boycotting Israeli academic institutions, we have brought you up to date with all the biggest stories affecting the student community here in Leeds.
But first, Lucy Reid looks back at one of our biggest stories this year.
It was Wednesday the 28th of October when hundreds of students met with medical professionals from the Leeds General Infirmary who marched together in protest against proposed changes to junior doctor contracts. This was all following months of negotiations with the government, and demonstrations were held across the country. Let's take a look back at that evening in Leeds.
No fair, not safe! No fair, not safe!
Despite freezing temperatures, many gathered at Victoria Gardens in Leeds to show their increasing dissatisfaction with the proposed changes to junior doctor contracts. Faraz Bhatti, who we spoke to earlier on this week, was pleased with the support that the demonstration received.
We've had some amazing speakers. We've got support from everyone. I would say that it's brilliant.
So junior doctors have turned out in their thousands tonight from all across Yorkshire to protest against potential changes to their contracts, which they're calling unsafe and unfair.
The 56,000 junior doctors are the backbone of the NHS. We are the staff that keep everything going. As it is now, our job is hard enough.
Well, I think it's really important that we're supporting all the junior doctors. We're both junior doctors, and I think we need to get the public aware of what's going on with the juniors' contracts.
The message is quite simple, really. It's not safe and it's not fair.
We want a contract that is fair and is safe for the NHS.
Johan Malawana, chair of the JDC, urges the government to have a rethink when it comes to implementing the changes.
This is not just about junior doctors and medical students. The profession is all standing together and standing behind junior doctors and saying that actually, Secretary of State, you need to rethink what you're doing. You need to value young doctors and medical students of the future, because they're the future of our profession and the future of the NHS.
Whilst Jeremy Hunt has stated that no junior doctor wages will be cut, protesters are still urging the Health Secretary to keep his hands off the NHS.
Jeremy Hunt keeps trying to assume that this is all about money. What we want to see is safeguards against junior doctors working excessive hours. We want to see patients being protected from the extremely unfair kind of provisions that Jeremy Hunt has tried to impose, and we want him to back down from basically trying to impose an unfair contract and preconditions on a negotiation.
People hope that this protest will deliver a clear message to the government and spur them on to negotiate for fairer contracts. Despite protests, not just in Leeds, but up and down the country, junior doctors are still being left fearful for their future. Lucy Reid, The Essential.
Now, cast your minds back to your first few weeks of university life. For many, it brings a new sense of freedom, getting to meet new people and settling into the student lifestyle. However, for one fresher, in September of this year, she became involved in a drive-by robbery and was then dragged along the streets of Leeds. Sadie Fox spoke to this programme exclusively. Let's remind ourselves of her story.
This is Sadie Fox, a first-year student at the University of Leeds. Like any other student, she was walking home from uni after a day of lectures. But as she was nearing the end of her walk home, it took a turn for the worse, as she became the victim of a drive-by robbery.
I felt a car come behind me and I thought it was just going to, pull in or just turn. And he came up really close to me. Next thing I knew, I felt a pull on my bag, and I turned to him and I saw this guy, and it's kind of like a backwards and throwing of the bag. It was like about 5 seconds while I was trying to get the bag back and I was screaming or whatever. And the next thing I knew, he put his foot down and was going in the middle of the road.
Sadie's arm became caught in her bag strap and was then dragged along the road by the car. It was at these crossroads she realised she was in the path of a parked car.
I was thinking if he didn't stop, I was going to slam straight into it. I don't know what thing. I thought I was going to be paralysed. I honestly didn't know what to think. I thought I was just going to slam straight into it. And then obviously at the very last minute, I was screaming at him to stop and whatever. And at the very last minute, he swerved, and that's when he stopped, and my hand became free. I think the most blurry part is when he first pulled the bag, because I do remember being dragged down the street quite vividly.
Luckily, Sadie had managed to avoid serious injury. However, the police are still searching for the driver of the car. Now, what they have confirmed is that the vehicle involved in the attack was a black Renault Clio, stolen from Beeston earlier that day.
West Yorkshire Police say they have some strong leads, but want anyone with any information to contact the neighbourhood crime team or call Crime Stoppers anonymously.
As I said, it's a one-off incident, so I don't want people changing their habits of a lifetime just because of a couple of idiots in a car who've gone out, and Sadie's been unfortunate enough to meet on that night.
Despite the horror of the attack, Sadie remains positive and wants to continue to enjoy the next 3 years of her university life in Leeds. Tom Dambach, The Essential.
Let's have a look back at a few of the other stories we've covered this year. Following increasing tensions, our reporter travelled down to London to follow the thousands of students who protested against tuition fees. Those who organised the march said it was part of a revolt against government policy.
We also spoke to 2 University of Leeds lecturers who are part of a boycott against Israeli academic institutions. It was in response to Israel's controversial occupation of Gaza.
At the start of the year, we visited the Centre for Sexual Health to see how they were going to tackle the new super strain of STIs. It followed the discovery of what was dubbed super gonorrhea, which was the first traced in Leeds.
In October, we reported on the strained A&E resources at Leeds General Infirmary as increasing numbers of students checked in at the emergency department for minor illnesses. We gained exclusive access and found that staff were becoming weighed down with what they describe as inappropriate attendances.
I picked up already in sort of 6 or 7 hours of shift 3 or 4 patients who are young students, new students, quite easily have gone to another healthcare provider.
And finally, a group of students who were caught up in the worst terrorism attack on the West in nearly a decade. Sam Munton reflects on the story.
In November, Leeds French Society ran a trip to Paris, a trip they had run many times before. However, this one was to be memorable for all the wrong reasons. As the world watched on in horror as the Paris attacks unfolded on our screens, Leeds students were experiencing it firsthand. Elliot Barthold told us his story.
This bar that we were at, we got told to leave basically halfway through at about 9:30. One of the bouncers came up to us and said we all had to leave, we had to get out. And then there had been a terrorist attack, and they told us there'd been a bomb, a suicide bomb out at the Stade de France, and that there were some shootings as well reported. At this point we're starting to panic a little bit, so we thought the best thing to do was to head back to our hostel, which was in the 10th arrondissement, which I don't know how much you know, but that was where the attacks actually happened. And so we're walking back to the hostel, and we just have loads of police cars coming past us, loads of ambulances, pretty much a solid line, and we just realise they're going in the same direction as us, and that we can't keep going that way, that we've got to find some cover, some shelter, somewhere we could stay. And amazingly and generously and fantastic, we found a Japanese restaurant where the owner was willing to let us stay in there for a few hours at least, and he put the metal shutters down. And for 50 people to be walking through the streets of Paris, it was a big target. So my personal view was, and it was a lot of views shared by everyone else, was to get into cover and to get out of sight, really.
So how long were you actually in this restaurant for? How long did you have to stay there?
I think we got in there, I want to say about 11 o'clock, maybe a bit before, and then we were in there till about 7:30. We decided that it wasn't safe to leave before sunlight, so we waited until that point and then walked home from there.
Well, that's all for this special edition of the programme, but if you want to watch any more of our content, head over to YouTube and simply search LSTV.
And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at LSTV Essential. We'll see you next time.